Hi everyone! Today we're going to talk about one of the biggest political scandals of modern history. Not just in Sweden, because what I'm about to tell you is so perverse, so all-encompassing in its ever-exploring depths of depravity. I feel like it has a global shock value here. Sweden's military research established that approximately 300 people have traveled to join ISIS, and so far, none of them have been convicted of crimes against humanity. As far as I can see, only 2 people were prosecuted in 2015. Everyone else is just walking around like free men, chillin' like villains. It is now estimated that 150 of those ISIS fighters have returned to Sweden, completely free from any consequence, just because little Miss Sweden can't make up her mind and doesn't want to prosecute these bad boys. However, I am happy to say there's now finally a public outcry from several Swedish lawyers, police, and politicians arguing that you could prosecute and convict all of these returners with existing Swedish legislation. But for the longest time, Swedish courts have just been completely unwilling to interpret the law like that, keeping relevant cases from being tested in court and keeping new legal precedents from being established. There's a few reasons to this, and we're gonna get into all of it, but first let me fill you up with the backstory scoop. A study conducted amongst 5 immigrant schools in 2 major Swedish ghettos showed that 10% of students sympathize with ISIS. Unsurprisingly, Gothenburg is also known amongst radicals as the Salafist haven of Europe. And Al-Qaeda has been active in Sweden since the 90s. Sweden should be proud of its international terrorism expert Magnus Ranstorp, but instead he gets hired more by other countries than his own. In a debate article published in 2016, he said that left-wing academics are at fault for Sweden's war against terror being held back 7 years. So add 4 years to that, and you got 11 years of progress lost and countless human lives sacrificed, all on the altar of political correctness. Don't tell me that your obsession with moral purity is harmless. Okay? I made a video about the terror attack in Stockholm a while back, where I established what kind of political attitudes paved the way for that disaster. Our politicians laid the foundation for tragedy with political correctness and post-colonialism. Amongst the leftist establishment, terrorism in this country is simply viewed as yet another symptom of racist structures. That's why Swedes keep thinking that you can rehabilitate returning mass-murdering ISIS pedophiles by giving them money, welfare, housing, and a job. And this progressive mass hysteria ends up having really creepy consequences. A woman was captured as a sex slave by ISIS when she was only 14 years old. She eventually managed to escape to Germany, only to one day meet her rapist in the street completely at random, because now he was there as a refugee as well. She eventually ended up escaping back to Iraq, where this man was later prosecuted. However, a human rights organization in Berlin that helps many Yazidi women says that this isn't uncommon. They know of several cases like this, and not many contact the authorities. What this is the left-wing establishment betraying the very vulnerable minorities that they claim to want to protect. Women who escape militant rapists end up seeing them again on the streets in Europe. Since Europe is so progressive and modern and liberated, the most progressive countries like to think of terrorists and war criminals as victims as well, since this is their definition of equality, happening in Sweden as well as Germany. This absurdity was well captured by Thomas Sowell in his book The Vision of the Anointed. Basically, the liberals, neocons, and socialists like to make themselves appear especially moral by sympathizing with the groups that nobody else wants to sympathize with. It's basically a snobby tolerance flex, a way of bragging by going, "Hey, look at my tolerance, it includes way more groups than yours, bro, so looking by comparison, I'm kind of better than you." I really recommend this Swedish documentary on Syrian war criminals for anyone who wants to learn more about what the tolerance flex does in practice. English subtitles are included. Put simply, we have refugees that came here during the 2015 migrant crisis, only to see whoever tortured them, raped them, abused them in the food line of their local asylum house. Because that's where cultural relativism gets you. And now that we have all these war criminals and national security threats just walking around, Sweden doesn't want to deport them, because that would be inhuman, since these people are risking inhuman punishment for their inhuman crimes in their home countries. That's your idea of justice? A Europol report from 2016 determined that 80% of European Islamist recruits have prior convictions, meaning they were already leading antisocial criminal lifestyles. The year is now 2020, and you can see that many of Sweden's returning ISIS fighters keep being involved with crime in various ways. Some even conduct the gang shootings that end up making headlines every so often, since these people have had plenty of training and experience with violence. Others merely make out a security threat and are surveillanced by our national security police. One neighborhood in Sweden had 60 residents classified as violence-supporting extremists. Can you imagine if 60 of your neighbors supported ISIS? I can't. 20 of these extremists are returnees from Syria, and police describe this environment by saying few of these people work and many commit crimes, particularly stealing, burglaries, and fraud, so they can use this money to fund and support terror groups abroad. So they just keep living as criminals in Sweden, while all our government wants to do is offer more welfare. Meanwhile, these extremists are making other Muslims feel unsafe locally by threatening the non-radical Muslims who are friendly to Western beliefs. Now clearly, Sweden's white guilt syndrome, causing them to want to cuddle up with terrorists, isn't just endangering themselves, it's also endangering immigrants, Muslims, and literally causing death and suffering in other countries. I'm not just thinking of the whole sponsoring terror abroad thing here. Think about all the people that traveled from here to join ISIS. One person alone, if they choose to become a suicide bomber, could kill upwards of 200 people. Do I need to say more? We already know 2 Swedish citizens helped carry out the terror attacks in Paris and Brussels, which claimed 164 lives, injuring many more. I think it's time to start taking the minority seriously here, okay? One person really can make all the difference in the world. And many times they do it for the worse. Other times they play a crucial role in making things better. This one Swedish doctor with a migrant background is responsible for saving tons of female slaves from ISIS. And she considers Sweden directly responsible for what's happening to all of these victims, saying, and I quote, "When they make it so easy to kill in Syria and then return to live safely in Sweden, I have no choice but to say Sweden is co-responsible for ISIS crimes against humanity." And this is true. Sweden, the first feminist government in history, not only sponsored Al-Qaeda allies during the refugee crisis, Sweden's also known for allowing their militant Islamists to travel to Syria, do the worst things imaginable to women and children specifically, then fly back to Sweden for healthcare, get patched up, then go back to Syria, where they commit even more crimes against humanity. Once again, Sweden's brilliant definition of neutrality really helps save the day. Oh, why must history repeat itself so? Scheiße! Sweden also extended the Holocaust with their highly neutral iron trade with Germany. In case you missed that history lesson, I just want to make sure my wit works here. Okay? Because the historical perspective matters. Character is established over time, captured through history, and I sense a cultural pattern here that reeks. The Swedish idea of neutrality has long been perverse. There's nothing neutral about cowering before evil, being hyper-conformist, and enabling genocidal maniacs. Why don't you ever learn this, Sven? Another aspect of terrorism and religious extremism, which is often neglected when this topic comes up, is the sexual violence. You look at the type of creepy gangs increasing right now all across Europe. You look at Rotterdam in England, where over 1,000 girls were victimized. Look at Oxford, Rochdale, and Newcastle, just to name a few. And notice how all this was done on the basis of ethno-religious hatred. During interviews, the perpetrators made it clear they specifically chose white girls because they're not Muslim, because they're considered unclean, and it's considered a kind of holy mission to punish them. Which kind of explains why gang rapes have just been getting more and more common in this country, although nobody seems to have drawn that connection yet. One of the survivors of Rotherham added further layer to this mentality, pointing out that Sikh and Hindu friends of hers were targeted for abuse as well. These kind of testimonies make it clear that anyone perceived as non-Muslim is at risk. And yet Swedes act surprised when their sex crime statistics shoot through the roof. The same years that you promised open borders to everyone, conducted no ID controls, you don't do any age testing, you accept war criminals, you don't want to deport criminals. Are you starting to see a connection here? Sweden handed out tons of residence permits to people who don't even have ID documents. Recently, our state media made a bold decision of admitting that 58% of rapes in this country are done by people who are born outside of the country. I'm guessing these perpetrators don't have a very high view of Western women. After a number of high-profile cases, a British imam commented on these rape gangs, saying that while most of them don't do this, there's still an alarmingly high number of mosques in Britain who teach their followers that women are second-class citizens, that white women especially are slutty, decadent, and deserve to be punished for their behavior by being degraded. As a result, these men exclusively wanted white girls to abuse because they're considered, quote, easy meat. It's well documented that dictatorships in the Middle East sponsor the building of mosques all across Europe and then send their Wahhabist preachers there to radicalize the Muslim population. This is partially how Gothenburg acquired their ISIS problem. And it usually takes place in migrant ghettos cut off from the majority society at large. Obviously, more terrorism isn't going to be the only result from these radicalization centers posing as casual mosques. A survivor of one of these gangs testifies saying there is a link between Islamist rape gangs and terrorism. Grooming gangs are not like pedophile rings. Instead, they operate almost exactly like terrorist networks, with all the same strategies. End of quote. The head of UK's Ramadan Foundation also confirmed this description, saying that some Muslim clerics teach out extremist versions of the Quran, and as a result, a minority of Muslim men view white women as okay to abuse. Minority really is the key word here, and it really says something about this when you got Muslim community leaders speaking out against this problem in their communities, while the privileged white leftists don't want to help women and try to cover up these problems. It's worth noting that survivors of these rape gangs are also concerned about growing hatred towards Muslims in general, because that's one of the key factors driving these kind of religious grooming gangs. Their existence thrives on ethnic exclusion and far-right rhetoric, because that makes it much easier for them to recruit more people, if Muslims start thinking that everyone hates them regardless anyway. In a sense, identity politics just breeds more identity politics. Most prominent example being how the survivor of a racist shooting in Malmö ended up joining ISIS. To nobody's surprise, since racism tends to feed more racism. And so the passive-aggressive version of racism, which is socialism and its political correctness, becomes equally unhealthy for Muslims as well as Westerners in general, because collectivism doesn't work. It's important to distinguish facts. If you want to explain Sweden's sudden rise in sex crime statistics, then this is where you need to look. Radicalization happening through these misogynist training camps, and a Swedish unwillingness to confront the minority doing the radicalizing. It's not like Sweden is doing too much inspection when it comes to any of the religious organizations that are collecting tons of taxpayer resources. And also doesn't help that Swedes insist on keeping 80% of their convicted imported rapists. Every immigrant I know finds that disgusting. Now, I'd like to switch it up and focus on the important minority of brave Swedish individuals that are taking a stance. Recently, a police officer took the initiative to report 300 extremists, as did terror expert Magnus Norell. Both argue it's entirely possible to convict them on the spot with existing legislation. They are backed in this by Judge Christer Thelin, who is highly qualified on the issue since he worked for 5 years with the Balkan War Tribunal. He also spent time as chairman on the UN Committee of Human Rights. In addition to this, a prominent crime journalist, as well as 2 lawyers, agreed that there's already plenty of room in existing Swedish legislation to prosecute all returning ISIS fighters. However, nothing is being done. Put simply, Sweden is paralyzed. People are generally just drinking coffee instead of taking a stance on terrorism. The answer I've gotten when discussing this topic with a law student is that no prosecutor in Sweden wants to be that guy. You know, the guy who starts the mass court trial against the ISIS fanboys, and then the group can issue a fatwa and the prosecutor has to spend the rest of their life in hiding. For reference, just look at one of Italy's most badass celebrity prosecutors who took on the mafia. Combine that with the racism of low expectations that exist among some Swedish court officials, thinking that these lower class people are gonna kill each other anyway, and you'll find a recipe for a Swedish disaster. I'm living in a collectivist society that doesn't understand the value in personal sacrifice, and their only hope are people who are willing to be annoying and uncomfortable. Thank God for those people. Like this website, Democracy and Justice. A team of police and politicians gathered testimony from ISIS survivors in Sweden. They're trying to push prosecutors into charging these terrorists so the issue can be tested in court with a reasonable interpretation of legislation, since that's the only way a precedent can be established. Feel free to check this site out. They have some really good information and are doing a really good job. And if you want to see ISIS scum brought to justice, please share this information. If anyone knows a foreign journalist willing to address this story, please contact them. Sources are in the video description as usual. And share this video, since YouTube's ridiculous community standards means that this video gets demonetized and punished in algorithms and recommendations just for the subject matter alone, so sharing is a bit more important than usual. I feel the only way Swedish authorities would truly wake up and do something about this mind-blowing disaster is if they get embarrassed enough globally, through international press, through social media, only once they become a laughingstock globally, only once their vanity is at stake, will the Aryan metros move in accordance with morality. In my experience as an opinion maker here, I've noticed that's what it takes, because this is a very small country, and so they allow their politicians to get away with very big loads of shite. It's quite disgusting. Meanwhile in Denmark, yet another ISIS plumber loses their citizenship. Why is Denmark so much better than Sweden? I don't know. Please leave a comment and inform the foreigner. Feel free to give this video a like if you want to help bump it up in the algorithms. Hopefully with enough international pressure, my country will stop being so freaking embarrassing. And only then will the Sweden image truly improve. Thank you for watching.